Hi, welcome back to Frank's Vinyl Review. I've decided for this week we're going to switch gears a little bit and focus on an album by the Grateful Dead, and this is their 6th studio album, the 10th album overall for those guys, the Grateful Dead's Wake of the Flood. I've really been intrigued by this album, mostly because I've been a big fan of the music that sort of led up to this album, specifically their live shows. They were playing extensively between February 1973, the show opener in Palo Alto, all the way through August, early August, August 1st, 1973, in Jersey City, New Jersey, and that was Jerry's birthday show, if you will. And then he flew back to the West Coast and began recording this album at the record plant in Sausalito, California. So had a chance to listen to this earlier, and it was really a great listen. I'm excited to go over it with you guys. As I just mentioned, they had been playing extensively on various tours that year leading up to August. So a lot of these songs had been road tested. Some going back to the previous year in 1972, Stella Blue, for example. They were just hitting this material hard on the road. So they obviously knew it. They didn't have any trouble translating that into the studio. Before we jump into it, though, I want to talk about the Grateful Dead. We're kind of in a transition in terms of this is the first studio album without their original founding member, Ron Pigpen McKernan, who had passed earlier in 1973, in March of 1973. But his replacement, Keithgodchaux, when this album was recorded in August of 1973, essentially Keith had been in the band almost 2 years. He joined the band in late August 1971. So we get to hear a composition by him on this album, and his contributions to this album sort of have come full circle after 2 years. He was on the band's live album Europe '72. So we get to hear him there. Him and his wife, donnajeangodchaux, she also joined the band in '72. Really make some really nice contributions to this album, and we're going to talk about that. But just want to sort of underscore that, that Pigpen had passed in March of '73. And so, as I was listening to this record, I kind of got a sense that, this was sort of a tribute to him. I never really thought about this record being a tribute to Pigpen, but some of the lyrics and some of the music, which we'll talk about, it sort of ties in. It ties in perfectly as a tribute to Pigpen, and it may have been, that may have been their intention. There's nothing in the literature that I've seen that really talks about that, but that's sort of what I got from listening to this, that there was this sort of underlying sort of tribute to Pigpen, and we'll touch upon that as we listen to the music. This was the Grateful Dead's second album of 1973. Their first album of the year was essentially a tribute to Pigpen. It was their last record with Warner Brothers. It was a live record culled from their February 13th and 14th shows, 1970 shows at the Fillmore East. So side A was, Pigpen singing acoustic songs, and then side B was him playing a couple of electric blues songs. But again, this, like I mentioned earlier, the idea of this being a tribute to Pigpen kind of rings true. I mean, in terms of a creative sense, right? They put out the live album; those were live recordings. But to really have some new material, sort of threaded together, if you will, I kind of like that idea better. This pressing is the Grateful Dead's 50th anniversary pressing that I got right off the Grateful Dead store, gratefuldead.net. It's been an interesting last few years for the Grateful Dead in terms of vinyl. Every year there's been these 50th anniversary pressings, if you will, going back to 2017 with the 50th anniversary of their debut album. You know, we've seen different pressings, right? Anthem of the Sun, Oxamoxoa, Working Man's, American Beauty. I mean, every year, you know, in 2021, we saw the 50th anniversary of their live album, Grateful Dead. You know, the last year in 2022, we saw releases, you know, the 4 Lyceum Show box set, which I hear is amazing. I did see a recent video of that unboxing. Looks amazing, and I know how good those shows are, so that's amazing. So a lot of great stuff, and I just wanted to say, just as a fan of the Grateful Dead, and you know, I very conscious of their record store day output, and you know, they're releasing a lot of their vinyl on Dick's Picks, and you know, we're seeing even Dave's Picks on vinyl. You know, I feel like the Grateful Dead sets the bar in terms of archival releases. You know, and releases like this, I mean, they just, you know, if you're a Grateful Dead fan, you know how impressive the way that they do their business, right? They release the very best shows, and they have such a huge vault to pull from. You know, there's so much, and there's still a lot of good music out there we haven't seen for release. So, David Lemieux, if you are watching this by chance, please release December 31st, 1972. As a Dave's Pick. That's a New Year's Eve show. That would be amazing. And I mean, it kind of ties into this Wake of the Flood in that, you know, that December 31st, 72 show was just an amazing show. Amazing version of Playing in the Band, amazing version of Truckin', you know, just an absolute crushing version of the other one. And so obviously, you know, after midnight, they're already in 73. But, you know, I just wanted to touch base on that show real quick, David, if you're watching. But again, this one came with a really nice color variation. You know, the sound was pretty decent. You know, I heard a lot of things that I sort of take for granted when it comes to Grateful Dead studio stuff. So I heard some nice stuff on here, and there's a few extra things here. You know, they included sort of this this little printout of the artwork and, you know, some of the distribution. So this is sort of probably a replica from their 73. And they also, which I thought was interesting, they included this postcard because the Grateful Dead had started their own record label. This was one of the first records on their new label. But this card says, I'll read it to you. Our record is being counterfeited. The authorities move too slowly not recognizing that our survival is at stake. We need your diligent efforts. The counterfeit has a square, not round corners on the stickers, and a white, not orange, 0598 on the spine. Check all stores and immediately report phonies to us. Thanks, Grateful Dead Records. And I don't want to go too far off the tracks here, but and there's the, you know, again, the level of detail. Obviously, I had to check the spine, even though this is a replica. You can see the orange 5908 there, but that's sort of a nice touch that they, the 0598, that they, you know, just made sure that this pressing was as close to the original as possible. So the album opens up with Mississippi half step Toodeloo, and you know, it's I mean, it's certainly not one of my favorite Grateful Dead songs, but I really enjoyed this version. You know, it has sort of a ragtime feel. You know, Jerrygarcia, he's always been a fan of old-time music, even way back then. There's some nice violin by Vassar Clemens, you know, and there's some cool lyrics, On My Way, and then there's sort of a duet between Jerry and Vassar. And you know, this song to me has sort of a Western, you know, like you're in a saloon kind of feel, if you will. And it's interesting that Jerry has Vassar Clemens playing on this record. You know, they were playing a lot of bluegrass together, and they were playing bluegrass in their band Old and in the Way with some other guys. So it's cool that Jerry has them on here playing on this album. We have, as I mentioned before, Keithgodchaux. He's making his studio debut on the piano. You know, he'd been playing a long time, going back to August of 71. And his first show was on October 19th of 71. So at this point, 2 years in, you know, he's still just, you know, really contributing to this this new music. This is all new music from the Grateful Dead, and sort of a pivot away from their psychedelic sort of the psychedelic rangers, that the pioneering music that they've always sort of been associated with. I mean, this by now here in '73, they're still very capable of playing that kind of music, but they've kind of stripped it down and sort of evolved into a softer, sort of jazzier sound, if you will. And we're going to hear more of that in this as we talk about this record. So Jerry takes a solo, and so his guitar gets pushed up in the mix. And I was wondering, I'm a student of Jerrygarcia in terms of his playing and his guitars. I think people that love the Grateful Dead know about Jerry's guitars. I mean, we could probably do a whole other video just on his guitars, but I think at this point, he was playing the custom Irwin guitar that has a very distinctive tone, and I know he debuted that in Nassau the month after these recordings, the Nassau Coliseum, which was again a fairly recent Dave's pick, and those shows actually celebrated the release of this album. They had horn players, Martin Fierro and some other cats who played on this record. Played at those Nassau shows. So again, getting back to Mississippi Half Step, I felt like, and some of the vocals, Vassar's playing some really nice stuff under Jerry's vocals. I like that, and the vocal refrain, "I'm on my way." It kind of works as a tribute to Pigpen, right? He's on his way, and it's this sort of Western music, and it's not blues necessarily, but it works as a tribute to Pigpen, I think. And then the vocal outro, right? The across the Rio Grande, across the lazy river, and we hear more of Vassar, and then sort of it fades out. But just a really cool opener. It kind of sets the tone for the record. And then the next song is called "Let Me Sing Your Blues Away," and this was written by Keithgodchaux. And this opens with horns. We hear some horns right away. We hear Keith on vocals, and again, it's this tribute to Pigpen, right? Because Keith Godchaux and Donna Godchaux, they became really close with Pigpen on the Europe '72 tour. There wasn't. Sometimes I think people think there may have been a rivalry between Keith and Pigpen in terms of keyboards, but I think Pigpen he obviously was a great vocalist, and going back to when the Grateful Dead had Tom Constantin on the piano, Pigpen. So Pigpen had that experience of playing with another keyboard player, and think about Vince Welnick and Bruce Hornsby much later in the '90s. There have been a lot of times when the Grateful Dead had two keyboard players. I mean, it just sort of happened that way, just like two drummers, two guitar players. I don't think they were super critical on those kinds of things. I mean, it was more musical. Does this work or does it not? And if it didn't work, then obviously they wouldn't pursue it. But so getting back to this song, Keith and Donna, they had a close relationship with Pigpen. There's a really nice sax solo here, and it's worth noting that the saxophone player I mentioned, Martin Fierro, and there was another player, and it's hard to sort of differentiate who's playing what. And Frank Marin, he was the other saxophone player, but it's kind of cool to hear just some different instrumentation, right? I think there was some trumpet on Anthem of the Sun by phillash, but this is the first time that we've heard horns on a Grateful Dead record, outside that little snippet by Phil. So this is kind of interesting. So we're back on the song, and Donna Jean, she's beautiful in the background vocals, and a lot of Deadheads know that she had a lot of musical experiences in Muscle Shoals, Alabama. She sang backup on a few Elvis records, and so she brings a lot of experience to the Grateful Dead vocal line. So that was kind of an interesting song. The next song is called "Road Jimmy," and this one's kind of mellow. It's got a kind of a reggae groove to me, with more changes. This isn't like your average ska, sort of reggae beat. It's sort of a cousin to "They Love Each Other," I thought. But it's a really beautiful tune and really nice vocals by Donna Jean here. She sounds great. And, you know, we hear some slide guitar by Jerry. And, you know, I guess he was really indulging in the slide in 1973. Like, I hear him, you know, even in the RFK 73 Dog Star, he plays slide. And, you know, he's playing a lot of slide in 73. So that's kind of interesting. I mean, he's always been a great steel guitar player. And he was maybe, you know, trying to do more with just that idea of playing with a bar, if you will. So here we've got some, you know, some really nice fill underneath on the bass, and you know, really nice drumming by billykreutzmann here. I really liked his work, and you know, we hear Keith on electric piano. And you know, with this song, I mean, it was such a great song, and I'm not that familiar with Ro Jimmy, but I was, you know, I mean, this is like peak Grateful Dead in the studio. I think they nailed it here on this one. They really shine, and you know, I love hearing billykreutzmann active. I mean, he was really active on this song with rolls and fills, and you know, it's just like, you know, they've always talked about it's been hard for them to capture their sound sort of in the studio, but when I hear Billy playing drums like that, like I do here on Ro Jimmy, it's like, yeah, they definitely nail it. So good job. And then, you know, it fades out with the Jerry vocal. And then the next song is Stella Blue, and it's been a favorite Grateful Dead song of mine for a long time. I just absolutely love it. It's got this really angelic opening, right? And if you're a Grateful Dead fan, you know this song, right? You've heard it. I mean, they played it. The song was debuted in June of '72 at Pigpen's last show, and they played it all the way to the end. You know, so just a beautiful song. And there, you know, the Grateful Dead ballads, right? You know them: China Doll, Comes a Time, Stella Blue. You know, there's so many, but Stella Blue is one of my favorites. I mean, I love Comes a Time, but Stella Blue is definitely up there for me as well. So, you know, a mood is set immediately with this song, right? We hear some really nice chords, sort of atypical chords that kind of give the song its color, right? I mean, I feel like the song's got a lot of color. Some really poignant lyrics. One of the lines, in the end, there's just a song, and you know, it's almost like a song about a song, really. It's really interesting. It was written in 1970 by Robert Hunter, the Grateful Dead's main lyricist. And then it wasn't until 2 years later when they were on their Europe 72 tour, and that's when Jerry decided to really sit down and write the music to Stella Blue. So 2 years later, and that's probably why we don't hear, you know, we hear it in June, right? He writes it, they're on tour, and you know, he finally sets music to it, and then so it's ready, and they start playing it in June. Again, nice Donna here. I love her vocals, and the thing about this song, really, and I'll just use the RFK 73 version as a point of reference. You know, Phil's just adding the right notes, and you know, he really, you know, it's like Phil is a big part of this song, right? It's a slow ballad, but Phil's just adding so much color, and you know, he's doing a really nice job. And you know, the line, and you know, I've seen some discussion on this online. I've stayed in every cheap blue light hotel, and you know, I thought that was kind of interesting. There's some haunting Jerry steel guitar in the background, and you know, there is some heavy picking up front when he's doing that, so I thought that was kind of interesting. You can hear Bob. It sounds like he's adding arpeggios. He's probably just picking the arpeggios out almost like chords. But I thought that was kind of interesting. You know, the music kind of builds again, and there's again more nice Billy. Billy's doing some nice rolls on his toms. And you know, again, they've been playing it since June of '72, but just a beautiful moment, you know, right on the heels of Ro Jimmy. You know, I thought side A was pretty solid, you know, and you know, when I open the record, right, there's the picture of the Crows, and you're not sure, well, what's side one, what's side two. You know, you could just drop the needle. Either side works, obviously, but you know, the next side two, it only has 3 songs, so if you tilt the record in the light, you can see obviously one side A has 4 or 5 songs, side B, the second side only has 3 songs, so that's how I was kind of Okay, so moving on to side two, the first song we hear, Here Comes Sunshine. I've always loved this song, and the first version I heard was from Dick's Picks, the Dick's Picks 1 from December 19th, 1973. Just an amazing version, and I'm pretty sure that's why Dick picked that show, because of that version of Here Comes Sunshine. So that version's always been sort of seared in my mind as sort of the, the best version, if you will. And I've heard some amazing versions since then. So it was kind of cool to hear this studio version. It is, I think the opening lyrics, wake of the flood, laughing water, 49. And I think Jerry, the lyrics sort of are talking about a flood that happened in a town in Oregon in the year 1949, like the dam broke. There was this huge sort of washout event. But to me, it still sounds appropriate in today's sort of, be it in your own state or your own neighborhood or, wherever you live in the world, we're just seeing these huge washouts, right? Like these climate change induced climatic washouts. That's kind of what I'm calling them. But so this idea, wake of the flood, still very much resonates, 50 years later here, with what's going on in terms of our weather. So I like sort of that connection. There's some really nice organ by Keith on here, and I noticed Phil, his bass is kind of snappy. Bob's playing some almost funk guitar underneath. If you listen to him, I just can't state the vocal, the chorus. Here Comes Sunshine. And there's some different effects on Jerry's vocals here. It's like it kind of reminded me of some of their more experimental stuff they did on Oxamoxua. Jerry's lyrics have sort of a watery, almost like a Leslie kind of effect on them. And even there were some different sounding keys. There were some different keyboard sounds, almost synthesizer-esque. And maybe it was too early for that, but it definitely had almost a Pink Floyd-y sort of sound to me on that one. And again, so we're in the studio, so that one kind of fades out. And then the next song on side two is Eyes of the World. Again, this song they'd been playing since February of '73. One of my favorite Grateful Dead songs. I learned how to play it on guitar and, would play it with friends. It's just it's a really fun song. I've heard interviews with Jerry talking about, where he got the influence, and he mentioned in kind of an obscure Paul Simon song that I wasn't aware of, but he said he was going for sort of this Brazilian samba feel, if you will. So it's interesting that he talks about that, and he may have been trying to, I feel like maybe even subconsciously there was some Stan Getz influence here. So anyway, we hear the opening chords, right? There's no extended intro. Live versions you'd hear that, you might hear Jerry solo for 2 to 4 minutes before they kind of sing the first verse. We get some more moody vocals by Donna. I noticed Jerry's vocals, he sounded a little sleepy here. I'm not sure why they, I'm not sure what was going on that day, but he sounded a little sleepy lyrically. We hear some more funk lines by Bob. And there's some subtle organ by Keith, it's interesting to hear that. Jerry takes his solo. Bob's really holding it down, just like in the live shows. And hearing the studio version, because everyone's parts are so defined, I feel like we get to hear the skeleton of the song, like sort of the, it's just the structure's kind of laid out a little bit better. I love the chorus. It sort of has almost a country feel, right? It goes into G, and it's almost a 1-4-5 out of G. Like I mentioned before, they'd been playing this a long time with Here Comes Sunshine. And again, this was, this is like them in sort of a new direction. This is new. This is sort of jazz dead. And even, in the versions of, they had Here Comes Sunshine, they had Eyes of the World. They were still playing Dark Star, and they were still playing the other one. But, they were doing some pretty jazzy stuff. Going back to '72, going back to the fall of '71, even when Keith first got on board, there was this sort of pivot, in their sound, and coupled with that, Mickey Hart was gone. Mickey left the band in February of '71. So Billy was the lone drummer here, and that gave him and his relationship to Phil and the ability to sort of twist and turn on the fly. It's sort of the stripped down version of Grateful Dead, if you will. Even going back to before Mickey joined the band. The period between when they first started in '65 up until the fall of '67 when Billy joined. They were this sort of stripped down, so they're back with that. They're back without Billy. But I just want to say how important these jams were in the larger jam vehicles, right? These jazzier, and you would hear Phil sometimes. The music would open up, and you could hear Phil quoting, Wayne Shorter's Footprints, for example, so that if you're familiar with this period, you'll definitely understand where I'm coming from. And just some other really nice jazz stuff that they were doing at the time. So that kind of ties into Eyes of the World. And, mentioning of Phil, Phil takes Eyes of the World out here. He plays a nice kind of a cool bass solo. So I thought that was cool. And then the last song on the record is Weather Report Suite. And when I first heard this, I was kind of blown away because I had only heard electric versions, right, on Dick's Picks and other live shows. So this was the first time that I heard the studio version, and I was kind of blown away that the beginning was on acoustic guitar, right? And the song was written by bobweir, and to hear him playing acoustic, I know how his dexterity is tremendous in terms of his reach, and just sort of visualizing him on the acoustic is kind of a cool vision, seeing Bob in the studio playing this. So I was really excited to hear how this one opens up on acoustic guitars. Again, it kind of goes back to their roots, right? When Jerry and Bob first met, they jammed out on acoustic guitars, and a lot of their music is they obviously have the reputation of being a fire-breathing electric dragon, if you will, right? But they do have a lot of roots in acoustic music, and again, it's just sort of underscores that. So I definitely wasn't expecting that. Jerry comes in on electric slide. Bob's playing acoustic guitar throughout this whole song, so I like that. The lyrics of Weather Report Suite, there's, it just kind of reminds, obviously they're talking about changing of the seasons. We're talking about autumn and fall, the transition from summer to autumn. What remains, the wind and rain, right? The weather's changing. Donna, she's continuing to do wonderful things vocally. She's just been singing so well on this whole record. There's some nice work by Jerry again, and we hear some more organ from Keith, and just sort of the music's just sort of glowing, and then we hear a nice sort of bridge, a change, if you will, and they sing this sort of vocal piece. We'll see summer come again, the same old friends, wind and rain. That's kind of a cool piece, especially on some of the live stuff that I've heard, live versions of that. Especially the June 28th, 74 version from the Boston Garden. Just a great version of Weather Report Suite. The music kind of quiets down, and then, there's a definitely transition, and, I knew they were transitioning into Let It Grow, which comes out of this Weather Report Suite. And so, again, just underscoring how great of a song this is. This is like Bob Weir's opus in terms of his composition, right? He wrote the other one. He put out a great album. He just had recorded Ace, which had a lot of great tunes on it. Cassidy being I'll just talk about Cassidy real quick. Another great one where he plays acoustic on, and that album was recorded in the early spring of '72. So we're a year and a half later, and he's got this just tremendous piece of music, right? The Weather Report Suite and Let It Grow. And if you listen to versions of the other one, there's one from August 6, 1971, and I think it's after they come out of Me and My Uncle on the other side. You can hear Bob quoting the Weather Report Suite, the opening chord, so that's kind of interesting that it goes all the way back there, 2 years before they recorded here. So that's kind of fun to talk about. I could hear strings, maybe they have Vassar and some other guys playing. Phil's playing some great angular lines. You know, he really sticks out. There's some interesting picking going on and some cordial slides. And then into that vocal refrain, listen to the thunder shout, I am. You know, it's almost existential, right? You know, Jerry solos, and you know, he's playing around the Let It Grow melody, if you will. And then they all jump back in, and you can hear more acoustic. And then there's some more sax lines by it's either Martin Fierro or Frank Marin. I'm not sure how they how they alternated, but it's cool to hear that. I even heard some subtle harmonica. Matthew Kelly was playing harmonica on this one, and again, just to sort of underscore that idea of it's a tribute to Pigpen, right? Because Pigpen played a lot of harmonica, so we're kind of coming full circle in the last song on that. There's a nice series to wind down. You know, you can feel the music's kind of slowing down a little bit. And then we hear the final, they reprise the I am piece, if you will. And then Jerry comes into his last solo, guns blazing. You know, you hear him he's lightning hot. And you know, again, he'd been playing a lot of bluegrass in '73, you know, with his band, with Vassar and his band Olden in the Way. And his solo, to me, it sounded more bluegrassy, and it could be he was playing so much banjo at the time as well. And so that song ends it. Just a great record. I mean, I say that on every show, but you know, just really happy with this one. I mean, you know, I learned a few new things from listening to this. You know, I appreciate it more, and it's sort of been, you know, in terms of my experience as a Grateful Dead collector, it's been kind of underrated, really. I don't really listen to this album as much as I probably should have, and again, more focusing on live stuff, bootlegs and live recordings. But yeah, this record is definitely worth a listen to, if not more. Obviously, you know, if you're a Grateful Dead fan, you probably have this already. But I believe there are still 50th anniversary copies at the Grateful Dead store. So definitely definitely pull the trigger. I mean, it's a beautiful pressing. Excuse me. I love that they continue to do these color variations for their 50th. So from a collector's perspective, you know, I've got quite a few of them now, and it's just nice to have, you know, these in color, and you know, you can imagine, you know, what the value will be like in 50 years on some of these, right? So it's just fun to collect, but they do sound great. And as always, the Grateful Dead team, Greg Norman, David Lemieux, and all the other men and women who are ever on the team, you know, just continue to do a tremendous job, continue to set the bar for live music archive releases. I mean, I feel like, I don't know what the categories are in terms of Grammys, but I feel like you guys crush it every year. You know, you're always a Grammy winner in my mind. You know, obviously the Grammys don't really apply, but you know what I'm saying? I'm just saying you guys set the bar for excellence, so thank you. So yeah, that's going to wrap it up for this week. Hope you enjoyed, you know, us listening to that Grateful Dead record, The Wake of the Flood. And you know, hope everyone has a great week, and we'll see you next time. Thanks. Have a great one. Talk to you later. Bye.